Hey everyone, sorry that this video is coming out literally a week later than I wanted it to. Just been super busy with school, life in general, so sometimes these things happen, but I'm gonna keep on trying to make videos weekly. Might take a little bit of a break in between certain videos, but hopefully a week is the most that it'll get to. Anyways, today's video is the first in a new series I'm starting on this channel. Technically, it's the only series on this channel, but we all start somewhere, right? This series is called Anatomy of a Fight Scene, and within it, I'll be deconstructing the greatest fight scenes in anime and manga. There are so many things that go into creating a good fight scene, and I really want to point out and explain how certain fight scenes go above and beyond to create some of the most memorable moments in fiction. I'm sure you already know this because, you know, this video has a title, but today's video is on Gon versus Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. I chose this fight not just because I really love it, but because I think it truly demonstrates all of the traits that characterize a good fight scene. Therefore, it's the perfect fight to start with, and I'll probably reference it in future parts of this series. Today, we'll be looking at the anatomy of Gon versus Hisoka. But before we get into the video, I have a pop quiz for you all. In this famous frame from Hunter x Hunter, what was Hisoka so excited about? Of course, the correct answer is the like and subscribe buttons, and who wouldn't have the same reaction? If you want to support this channel as well as escape Hisoka's wrath, I would strongly recommend clicking both of those buttons. Now let's get into it. So since this is the first video in this series, I'm going to quickly outline what I think makes a good fight scene in an anime. There are a couple different factors that are essential in properly constructing a fight scene: build up and suspense, both before and during the fight, a satisfying and exciting climax, payoff and effect on the rest of the plot, character development both during and outside of the fight, setting, the structure of the fight itself, choreography and visual effects, and the strategies and abilities each character showcases. Of course, some of these characteristics are more important than others, and depending on who you are, certain aspects may be more important to you than they are to other people. For example, I personally care a lot about strategy in fights, which is why I like Hunter x Hunter so much, but some people care a lot more about how visually appealing a fight is. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. We all have our different preferences. So because of that, I'm going to comment on every aspect of fights that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, I won't spend an equal amount of time on everything, but I'll touch on everything to some degree. One of the best aspects of Gon vs. Hisoka is how incredibly well it fits into the plot of Hunter x Hunter as a whole, in addition to how it fits into the Heaven's Arena arc itself. This is a fight that we've really been waiting the whole series to see because Togashi set up the dynamic between Hisoka and Gon as early as possible. Hisoka has always been someone that Gon saw as an enemy. He was extremely intimidating during the Hunter exam and threatened Leorio and Kurapika during the first stage of the exam. And Hisoka has been fascinated with Gon and his potential ever since their first confrontation. Of course, Gon spent a huge amount of time trying to get Hisoka's badge off of him during the exam, and although Gon improved his hunting skills and eventually succeeded in his attempt to get the badge, he was ultimately left defeated and completely disappointed with the way that Hisoka practically gifted the badge to him in the end. Even though Gon had grown during the Hunter exam, the difference between him and Hisoka was still astronomical. With Hisoka's challenge to Gon telling him to give him back the badge only when he could land a punch, Gon gained both motivation and a solid reason to fight Hisoka again in the future. And while this moment is when Hisoka's challenge is actually issued, this isn't the last time that Hisoka challenges Gon before their fight, whether it be directly or indirectly. He uses his aura to attack Gon and Killua when they reach the 200th floor of the Heaven's Arena, and then showcases his immense power in his fight against Castro, a Nen user who could use advanced abilities such as N already at this point of the story, which Killua was extremely shocked by. Both of these instances are challenges to Gon. They both demonstrate the immeasurable disparity in their Nen abilities. Now, those are all examples of why this fight happened, but the plot is also integral in understanding how this fight could happen. It's really not often that such a great fight has a conclusion in which no one is killed or seriously injured by the end of it. If we take the entire plot into account, however, this makes complete sense. Hisoka has already made it clear that he doesn't want to kill Gon at the moment, and because the audience has already witnessed him stating this on multiple occasions, it really doesn't seem strange that he would hold back against Gon. Of course, the setting helps immensely with this aspect of the fight. Since the fights at Heaven's Arena are adjudicated based on a point system, it seems to be fairly uncommon for someone to be killed during the course of one of these fights. Unless that fight involves Hisoka, I guess all of them do. I don't know. I just think this fight is so interesting because it has a fairly unique ending, yet because of how well Togashi sets up the fight from the beginning of the series, the conclusion doesn't feel unnatural at all. In my original list from earlier in the video, I did mention impact on the rest of the plot, but to be honest, I actually think that's one area that this fight is a bit lacking in. That isn't really a criticism. The point of this fight is to effectively conclude the conflict between Gon and Hisoka for the time being, so it's mostly meant to be the end of one chapter of the story rather than than the beginning of a new one. Everything that happened after this fight probably could have happened all the same whether this fight happened or not, but it would have felt extremely unnatural for this conflict to not happen given all of the buildup that we got beforehand. I think this fight would have had more relevance to later parts of the plot if Gon and Hisoka ever actually fought each other again. However, looking at the state that Gon's in right now, I sincerely doubt that's going to happen anytime soon. Regardless, this is an important step in Gon's development as a character and also a great showcase of Hisoka's abilities, so it's only natural that this fight happened when it did. Of course, no matter how well any fight or scene for that matter is set up, the fight itself needs to be entertaining and exciting for it to be considered a great fight. So let's talk about the actual fight itself. I've said the word fight so many times already that it's not even sounding like a real word anymore. I'm going to be focusing on the version from the 2011 anime since it was the first version that I experienced, and I also think it's the best version of this fight. Right off the bat, I have to say that I was absolutely astounded by this fight the first time I watched it. It's simply visually stunning, and I think it's in moments like these that Madhouse truly shines and shows us why they're considered one of the greatest animation studios ever. The color palette, extremely detailed animation and camera work, the voice acting, and the use of music in conjunction with suitable silences make this fight an absolute spectacle to behold. And as I was analyzing it, I was honestly left speechless at times. I'm getting a bit sidetracked though. Just because a fight is aesthetically pleasing doesn't necessarily make it good, so let's talk about what actually happens during it. Most fights progress towards an eventual climax, which is usually when a character reveals a completely new power and goes all out, or when the protagonist finally wins and there's a huge emotional payoff for the audience. I think the perfect example would be Luffy versus Rob Lucci from One Piece. However, neither of these options are really feasible within the bounds of this fight. We effectively know all of Gon and Hisoka's powers at this point, and it's literally impossible for Gon to actually defeat Hisoka. So how does Togashi create a suitable climax that doesn't fit into either of these categories? The answer is simple. Through all of the plot and character development that has occurred before this point in time, Togashi has already planted the idea of an alternative climax in our minds. Gon finally landing a punch on Hisoka is all we really need to see for this to be a fulfilling fight. That's why I spent so much time talking about the whole plot leading up to this fight. If you haven't watched everything that comes before this, then the fight itself doesn't have nearly the same amount of emotional weight or impact. This is what I believe characterizes immaculate storytelling. Almost no event in Hunter x Hunter exists solely for itself, but instead every plot point ties into and elevates another. Well, everything before Gon versus Hisoka leads up to this moment. How does the actual fight itself lead up to the climax that I'm talking about? I think that this fight has one of the most well-done opening sequences that I've ever seen. Gon desperately tries to penetrate Hisoka's defenses with a flurry of punches, and the music entirely cuts out so that all we hear is the impact of different hits along with Gon's increasingly labored breaths. And the animation and cinematography are so well done. The camera POV follows even Gon's slightest movements, and moments like him flipping in the air after being kicked by Hisoka feels so incredibly lively and dynamic. This entire exchange feels so intense without the need for Nen powers or complicated strategies yet. It communicates exactly how badly Gon wants to land a punch on Hisoka. So already, right out of the gate, we get an incredibly tense exchange, and this tension is elevated by the fact that Hisoka ends up ahead by 1 point by the end of it. We can see that Gon has a lot more work left to do, and he really needs to change up his strategy somehow. While a simple exchange of blows between two people can often convey more feelings than mere words can, Hunter x Hunter excels even more in showcasing fights that require copious amounts of thought and strategy to win. Even someone like Gon, who isn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed in normal circumstances, can come up with a battle strategy that helps him achieve his goals. Togashi employs this sort of trope of spectators narrating strategical ideas so that the main character doesn't have to explain them himself. Killua thinks to himself, Hisoka knows that he's stronger, so he won't retreat. And this is the exact circumstance that Gon decides to take advantage of. So far, Hisoka has not moved a single step from where he started, and he's so conscious of the disparity in power that he's very unlikely to move unless he truly feels threatened. So, of course, Gon launches a plan so simple yet effective that only he would think to do it. He charges at Hisoka, and after a flurry of feints, he falls back and hurls a stone tile at him. Once Gon breaks that tile, Hisoka keeps his focus completely on defending himself from the stones and isn't able to figure out that Gon's behind him before it's too late. I think that this moment is really well done in the anime. The two trumpets that make the music increasingly tense as Hisoka wonders where Gon is, and the slow reveal of Gon behind one of the fragments of stone. Just everything about the segment is absolutely perfect build-up. And once Gon hits Hisoka, we get a moment of complete silence. Everyone, including us, the audience, is so shocked at what just transpired. This is the perfect climax. It doesn't have to come right at the end of the fight. It's the moment that we've been waiting about 30 episodes for, and the long build-up, both inside of and outside of the fight, has led us perfectly to this exact moment. I've said this in a separate video before, but when I watched this episode for the first time, I literally jumped right out of my seat and shouted with excitement. To put it simply, this is such a hype moment. This placement of the climax creates a slightly weird situation. Usually we'd think of the climax of a fight as being right at the end, but I'm interpreting this climax to be placed right in the middle or even closer to the beginning than the middle. However, because of the steady build up to this climax and the fact that the action never ceases for quite too long, I think the rest of the fight remains interesting and sort of rides the high of this climax as much as it can. Gon punching Hisoka happens at a great time in the anime. It comes right at the end of episode 35, so we get a really big cliffhanger. Plus, it feels like the fight is divided into two halves fairly naturally. While the first half of this fight is very emotionally charged and primarily focuses on Gon trying to push Hisoka as much as he can, the second half really shows us just how incredible Hisoka is. Not just how physically strong he is, but how superior he is to Gon intellectually. Hisoka doesn't really need to try to defeat Gon. Of course, we see him display his speed and power when he actually attacks Gon for the first time, which is another scene that featured amazing cinematography. But that scene is mostly there to show that Hisoka is actually taking Gon seriously for once. Something that I really love from that whole sequence is how Hisoka kicks a floor tile so hard that it flies away. It's almost like he imitated Gon's move from the previous sequence, but of course there's an astronomical difference in power. The second half of this fight is almost torturous to watch if you're rooting for Gon, which I assume the entire audience is, since he really can't fight back at all once Hisoka's bungee gum is attached to him. This fight still manages to be captivating in spite of this, and in fact I think it would be much less captivating if an unrealistic outcome like Gon actually winning occurred instead. Gon tries his absolute hardest throughout this fight, and if the result wasn't realistic, I think it would invalidate all of the training and hard work Gon does after its conclusion. Despite Hisoka dominating the second half of the fight, I still think it's just as entertaining to watch as the first half. We don't even need the same visual effects or sequences as before, as this second half is fundamentally different from the first anyways. We get some really interesting dialogue from Hisoka, which further cements how much more experienced he is than Gon. He explains all the different points at which he could have attached his bungee gum to Gon, which effectively shows how screwed you are if you ever try to fight Hisoka, and also explains his own Nen personality test. The latter doesn't have a huge amount of significance to the plot, especially since it's not entirely accurate, but it's still a nice little detail Togashi threw in order to flesh out Hisoka's character more. And, of course, the most memorable moment from this fight is the infamous, Arousal Scene. This is another detail that adds to Hisoka's character, cementing his extremely abnormal sexuality in the eyes of the audience, but it's also just funny as fuck. It's nice to have a balance of emotions in an important scene like this, and I think Hunter x Hunter is one of those series that knows just where to place its strangest and funniest moments. The fight's ending may seem a bit anticlimactic since it's basically just Hisoka tricking Gon and throwing a stone at him. However, I thought it was completely fine. Considering we already got an extremely effective climax in the middle of the fight, we really don't need one at the end. And attempting to create another climax at the end most likely would have been extremely unnatural. I like Gon versus Hisoka just as it is, and the way that Togashi structured and framed the fight made it unique while still being just as exciting as other great fights in other shonen series. That's pretty much it for this video. Like I said, this is the start of a new series, so subscribe and leave a comment letting me know which fight you'd like to see an analysis of next. Anyways, stay tuned for the next video and see you then.